All right. Okay, welcome to Mastermind with Neil Schwartz and our special guest, Troy, who heads up 21st Century Property Management. Troy and I were talking the other day about a lot of different things going on. And in our conversation, it became clear to me that a lot of our listings are tenant occupied listings. That makes sense, you guys? Those are so we're not exactly sure of the percentage, but I know that prior to COVID, we probably were selling on average between 8 and 15% of the listings we took had tenants in it. You give them their regular notice, et cetera, they would move out. Maybe you had a little holdover. COVID came in. We ended up with the TPA, which is the Tenant Protection Act, which they put into force at the time of COVID and have kept in place since that time, right, Troy?
That's right. Not only kept in place, but have enhanced and recently enhanced kind of the protections under that as well.
So we're taking listings, we're sharing with our sellers what they can do, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, et cetera, et cetera. And in some cases, we're starting to give legal advice, which we all know is an absolute no-no. So in my conversation with Troy, I wanted to bring him in. I wanted to share some of the successes of 21st Century Property Management, which has been a great addition to the organization. And as we merged both companies, really, really cool. So Troy, why don't you give us a little Reader's Digest version of your background, how you started in that business, etc.
Yeah, so I started in real estate after college. So I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and after college started in Denver with a multifamily operator that was based out of Austin. They had a number of properties in Denver and all around the country. So got started in property management with them. I moved out to California in 2009, and I worked for San Diego State University for about 5 years and managed a big off-campus housing portfolio for them. And then incidentally from there, I went from the public sector back to the private sector, got involved with a company called the Dinnerstein Companies, which is one of the biggest privately held apartment developers in the country. And interestingly enough, that is where I met Keith Thompson. So we were colleagues at Dinnerstein, 12, 15 years ago at this point. So that's a little bit about how I know Keith. At Dinnerstein, I did property management as well as went on to the development and acquisitions team. So we did big apartment developments throughout California, Arizona, Colorado, developed a number of big commercial apartment buildings with them. And then followed that up with a 6-year stint in LA. I joined a real estate startup there at USC, spent a couple of years with them, left that business about almost 5 years ago now. I started my own property management and development company in LA. And we acquired a number of properties that we owned, managed, renovated, and developed at the University of Southern California. At USC, I did that for a few years and then wanted to get back to San Diego, ended up having a conversation with Keith. He told me about Full Realty Services, and he said, we're trying to put something together where we offer a whole suite of services for real estate, and we don't have a property management piece. And from those conversations, we kind of developed 21st Century Property Management, which we launched almost 2 years ago now.
Wow, fantastic. So you started from zero, and right now you're up to about 450 or so properties under management?
We've got about 450. We started with none, and hit about 450 in about 18 months, which is pretty remarkable growth in this industry.
In that you don't own and are developing the properties first.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very common for developers to have property management divisions or companies like that. But to start to open a store, is pretty remarkable. I think that says a lot about you and the organization that you're attached to. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Neil. Yeah, I've got a great team here that works with us on making this all happen.
And it's a nice win-win thing too. You know, you've picked up over 50, 60 properties since we've started together, and that are single mom and papa kind of owners, and that's building that portfolio of business also.
Right. Yeah. It continues to grow, and I'm really proud of the team and what we've done. We've got a 4.7 star rating on Google. We're almost at 100 reviews. So the feedback has been really positive and really encouraging that we've gotten.
And you're also our resident AI guy.
I do the Chat GPT once a month. So if you haven't gotten a chance to do that, it's a lot of fun.
Good. Well, I appreciate it. Appreciate you. So where we got started here was that a number of the agents, as I've said earlier, are getting tenant occupied listings. And that's a whole interesting problem in itself. So you want to talk about some of the rule changes, maybe, Troy, that some we know about, some we don't know about, and some are pop up on a daily basis?
Yeah. I'll give a quick background just on the TPA, and it's also referred to as AB 1482, and what's kind of happened with that law. So the general consensus is that it's a very poorly written bill. It lacks a lot of clarity, and like a lot of things that happened during COVID, it was a hastily prepared piece of legislation. But it did have a requirement that in October of 2020, if your property was exempt, so single family homes or single condos that are owned by an individual owner, so they're not owned by a corporation, and they're not owned by an LLC where a corporation is a member of that LLC. So really individuals or kind of individual LLC trusts, those sorts of things are exempt from the protections of the Tenant Protection Act. As long as they served a notice in October of 2020 to the tenants that they were exempt, or that they incorporated that exemption into any lease that started after that. So the nice thing about it is it doesn't tell us what happens if you didn't serve that notice or include it in your lease. It's pretty ambiguous on that. So the problem that we have is a lot of these single family homes that are coming to market, those owners were not aware or educated about this law and didn't know that they had to serve those notices. So our understanding is that if those notices were not served and weren't incorporated in a future lease, that they are protected by the Tenant Protection Act. And that's the view that I think has kind of become the consensus among the legal counsel that we've consulted on it. It's the most conservative stance that you can take on it. So if that notice wasn't served or is not incorporated in the current lease agreement in some way, the assumption should be that the property is protected under the TPA.
So what protections are those, that you might not have otherwise?
So the main protections under the TPA are a limit on the increase in rent. So rent increases annually are capped at the consumer price index plus 5%. And I think, and hopefully I'm not talking out of school here, but I think one of the things that's in Assembly now is a more concise demonstration of what CPI is. But you can get that calculation, and so it's 5% plus that is the maximum annual rent not to exceed 10% increase. The second big protection, and this is the one that really comes into play if you've got a seller that's trying to sell a tenant occupied property, is the no fault eviction protections. So at fault evictions proceed as they always have. So the tenants are not protected from not paying rent. So if they're not paying rent or they're otherwise materially violating the lease, then evictions can proceed pretty much as they had previously. No fault evictions are the ones that we're worried about, and there's 4 reasons for a no fault eviction, and that would be that the owner is going to move into the property, that the property is being withdrawn from the rental market, and that would include putting it up for sale, would be removing it from the rental market, that the property is going to undergo substantial renovations. And again, there's some ambiguity in this law about what substantial renovations are. That's part of the latest update to the bill that just came out, is trying to help clarify what a substantial renovation is. And finally, for government orders, so if the government's declared the property uninhabitable for some reason, that is a reason for a no fault eviction.
Or the government wants to take the property and buy it.
Sure, I think that would fall under that category. Okay. So
right. They want to widen the freeway.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. So are there any changes in terms of 30-day notice versus 60-day notice, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes. So it's a 60-day notice is required if I believe if the tenants have been there for a year or more, then it's a 60-day notice. And that needs to be served. And CAR has a form, and I think it's called the notification of termination of tenancy form. And I would encourage you to reach out to Terry or Cindy or someone regarding the use of the proper CAR form there. But they have a form that will help dictate if it's 30 or 60-day notice, and then which of the no fault eviction reasons you're evicting under.
So that's Terry, Cindy, or Jackie. And of course, if we have a specific thing like came up the other day about the city of South Pasadena, then, and nobody knows the new rules on the new rules, they can reach out to you and see if you have the answers.
Sure, absolutely. And that's the one thing to be aware of. The statewide, the TPA is the minimum tenant protection that is required statewide. It doesn't stop counties or cities from enacting stricter rent control laws. So that's something that you have to be aware of. Like South Pasadena just enhanced theirs. If you are in the city and county of Los Angeles, you probably already know that that's a totally different world. So, city of LA, like I said, I spent 6 years there. And that's a whole different set of rules.
Stricter, less strict?
Much more strict.
Okay, got it. but the bare minimum is the TPA.
That is the minimum statewide. Yes.
So let me ask you a question. You said it's cost of living, and right now the cost of living increases are what, somewhere in the 2.5 to 3.5 range?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at a CPI calculator, but yeah, I think it's something like that right now.
Something like that. So if I wanted to raise the rents in my properties and I hadn't done that in a while, I could raise it the CPI plus 5%,
Correct.
theoretically.
Theoretically.
Yeah, because I think that consensus on the streets has been all you can raise it is 5% in the state. Now, if the city of Pasadena would be, as an example, more strict on the percent of increase or less?
I don't have it in front of me, Neil, but I think the reading is, I think it's the same as the state.
Got it. Okay. All right. Do you find that generally the case, or do you need to look for those rules in each city or county?
You definitely want to check in each city and county, and I would encourage everybody to, the best way to do this is to locate a real estate attorney that is capable in the city that you're
come over
doing the
here.
transaction, and confirm that there's no additional legislation locally that impacts the TPA.
And not every attorney knows the answers to those rules. You need a specific attorney, correct?
Why are you being rebellious? Okay.
Right. Yeah, you're
Right.
going to need somebody that is familiar with, tenant protections and landlord tenant law.
Got it. Hold on. I need to clear. Please make sure when you're talking in the background and stuff, ladies and gentlemen, that you mute yourselves. Thanks. Okay. All right, good stuff. Rosalinda wrote in here, the rent increase max 10% was only if you're an LLC per the rent cap disclosure. Is this correct? Is there a difference there?
That is only if the property is not exempt. So again, none of this applies if the owner provided the proper notice in October of 2020, or they've included the exemption notice in subsequent leases. So that form has been around with CAR since 2020, I think.
Okay. So we want to make sure that that's been done in there. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's cool. That's interesting.
And that can happen. My understanding on that, Neil, is that can even happen if they're on a month-to-month lease and you're doing a change in terms of tenancy where you're just, say, increasing the rent, that you can provide the notice at that time. It just needs to be provided as part of a new lease or a lease renewal or a change to a lease in order for it to be effective.
So you said Los Angeles is a little bit more difficult.
That's an understatement.
Okay. In what areas? I mean, clearly most of us don't do business in Los Angeles. However, there are agents taking listings in that territory. Now, so here's an interesting question: is it the state, the county, the city?
That's right.
Is that how it goes?
Yeah.
So the city, you have to, if you've checked with the city, you're probably going to be okay because they're always going to be the strictest.
Right.
Of those three.
Yes. Yep.
But you wouldn't necessarily just use the state in a particular city because the city overrides the state.
Right. So
Correct?
LA's a great example. And in Los Angeles, and I'm going to get the year wrong, but it's 1975 or 1978, somewhere around there. Any property in Los Angeles built prior to that, and I can't remember, we were doing student housing, so even our single family homes were considered multifamily under that. So I don't know if there's a single family exemption, but in Los Angeles, all properties built before that date are part of the rent control program, and they're all part of what's called systematic code enforcement, the SCEP program, which requires city inspections to happen periodically of those properties. So that's just as an example. If you were to go just by the state, you'd be way off on what was necessary in the city of Los Angeles for a property in that program, because it's got to be submitted to the program, and then you've got to do all of the inspections and make sure that everything is filed and you're paying all the fees, and it's a pretty intensive process for rent control in LA.
So if I have a triplex in LA, am I under all those rules?
If it was built before that date in 76 or 78, whatever it is, then yes, you're automatically subject to those rules.
Isn't everything built in LA before that date?
Almost all of it.
Interesting. Okay. So LA is the seems to be the most strict. I mean,
LA is the most, yes.
The most strict. In our markets that we service, Long Beach to Hemet, Menifee, Marietta, etc., we run in any other things like that?
I haven't seen anything in the majority of our markets here that is any stricter than the state level requirements. In fact, even the South Pasadena, it very closely mirrored the new state rules. And so it really isn't more, even South Pasadena is not more strict than the state necessarily.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So if you check South Pasadena, you'll find that they probably aren't any more strict than the original TPA.
No, they're not any more strict than the updated TPA that just came out.
Okay, got it.
So I'm not sure
Right.
why they did that and codified it locally, but they did.
All right, got it. So when we get what's the procedure we should use when we take a listing on a triplex, fourplex? I mean, I guess let me back up one step. Single family homes are considered single family homes as far as most of our car documents in 1 to 4. Okay. So when do we have to start paying attention to these eviction laws? Do we have to start paying attention from the moment we find out there's a tenant occupied property? And if so, what's the procedure for that?
So just to do a little further clarification there, Neil, I think the real problem that's coming up here are these single family homes that were never exempted from the law. So, and the problem is that's most of the single family homes in the rental market, because most of them, are owner managed. So they're owners that have rented it out themselves and they're trying to bring it to market. They didn't know about the TPA. Generally, there's a lot of things that they don't know about when they're managing their own property, but they didn't know about the TPA. They didn't serve the proper notice, and therefore they missed the exemption. And that's what's causing a lot of issues for people, because there's under that no fault eviction requirement, there is the requirement to pay relocation fees to these tenants to get out of that contract. And if those notices aren't served properly about the eviction, and if those relocation fees aren't paid properly, it can void the entire notice. So you could get potentially into a transaction where you think you've served notice and you think you've got a tenant that's getting out, and then you've got a technicality that comes out and your notice is going to be void and that tenant doesn't have to get out. And you certainly wouldn't want to be in the middle of a transaction or an escrow and have that happen.
And then any damages that the seller incurred could be focused back on us and our errors and omissions insurance because we didn't advise to have an attorney look at it, or we gave, it's 60 days, don't worry about it. That kind of stuff sometimes get us into trouble. So in that case, your advice would be to make sure that we check everything through Cindy, Terry, and Jackie, A, and then B, maybe double check the city. I mean, give me the checklist there for us to help.
Yeah, the first thing to do is to verify whether or not the notice was served or included in their current lease.
And how do you do that if it's not in the current lease?
If it's not in the current lease, the owner should have a copy of the notice that was served and when it was served.
And served means what? We hand it to them, we email it to them, we mail it to them, or we actually have a service company serve it to them?
It needed to be posted on the door, so they'd need to have some proof of service that it was properly posted and delivered to the tenants.
And we need to be able to prove that, or that
Right.
owner needs to be able to prove that. If they can't, sorry?
Yeah, the owner needs to be able to prove that they, beyond a doubt. For example, we've got a number of properties in our Hemet portfolio that the previous management company attached the notice to the lease, but it's not signed by anyone.
Got it.
And so the owners feel like, well, the notice is there, we served it, but we don't have anything to prove that notice was actually served. We don't have a photo, we don't have a certified mail. So an unsigned notice attached to the lease, I'm certainly not comfortable calling that notice.
Service.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Monica Nogales, hello, Monica, had a question for us. She asked, rule for built prior to 76 or 78. Was that the city of LA or county of LA?
I'm pretty sure that's city, but let me make a note and I'll make sure I verify that.
So Josie asked an interesting question. In Orange County, when renewing the lease and giving the tenant the rent cap form, what if the tenant refuses to sign it?
That's a good question. The advice that we've gotten from legal counsel, and you probably would want to get this on a case by case basis, because you'd want a communication from an attorney that you could rely on, to say, this is what you need to do. But the attorneys that we've talked to have said that giving them the notice at the time of the change should be sufficient. They don't have to sign it. And that's part of where the ambiguity in the law comes in. The spirit of the law was never to subject single family homeowners to the Tenant Protection Act. And there's still a lot of question whether failing to give the notice actually subjects a property to those protections. But because no one's challenged the law, it hasn't been appealed, it hasn't gone to the state Supreme Court, there is no answer for that question. And frankly, it's usually such a low dollar amount. I just don't see why someone is going to make that appeal anytime soon, and we're going to get any clarity on it. So, I would say in a case by case basis, I would just check with an attorney when you do the change in terms for a lease or do a lease renewal, and just get their clarification if the tenant won't sign it.
Got it. Boy, this is pretty complicated stuff.
It is. It gets very complicated.
Yeah. Let's see. There was another question. Is there a rent control map of city of Los Angeles? No. For single family residents giving notice to move, does the seller still have to offer money?
Again, if the property was not exempted from the TPA, so if it's subject to the TPA, then yes, the requirement is a 1 month's rent payment. And that payment either needs to be made within 15 days of the notice, or you can waive the final month of rent. But that is a requirement of all properties that are subject to the TPA.
Isn't there something where recently I heard it could be 2 or 3 months rent that we have to pay? Nothing that you're aware of?
I'm not sure which of the no fault reasons that applies to. I think for the taking it off the rental market, it's 1 month's rent. I think it's more if you're doing substantial renovations. Although now substantial renovations are extremely hard to navigate. They've kind of defined the requirements for a substantial renovation, and it's very serious, the criteria that you have to meet.
Got it. Tiffany asked, what is the amount for the relocation fee? And I want to ask you on that, is that what you're referring to as 1 month's rent or 2 months rent?
Right.
Okay, got it. Okay, so at the most, it could be in this world would be a couple months, even in Los Angeles County or Los Angeles City?
No, in Los Angeles, if it's part of the SCEP program, it's totally negotiable with the tenant. That's something that we were doing up there, and it's not uncommon to see those get into the $150,000 per tenant for relocation in LA.
My gosh.
Very, very tough market for redevelopment.
Yola just wrote down here that Pomona asks for 29,000. Is that, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Some of the, in and around LA, there's definitely more stringent requirements for relocation. It's a totally different world though, but.
Oh, this is crazy. Okay, so, well, let's do this. Let's, we can go prior to taking, so Rosa Delgado said, prior to taking a listing on a tenant occupied SFR, what should we be aware of besides the 60-day notice? Good question.
The other big thing that you should be aware of is the notification to the tenants for showings. So I think, and don't quote me on this again, let's verify this with one of our other experts here, but I think the law is that you have to provide 24 hours notice before entering a property. However, if the property is being put up for sale, I believe you can give a 120-day notice, which allows you to give verbal notice of showings and just show up. so that you're not kind of subject to having to give that notice if you want to be able to show the property, on short notice. In a tenant occupied scenario, I wouldn't recommend doing short notice showings anyway. It's much better to give notice and try to make sure that the place is going to look as good as it can, and hopefully the tenants are cooperative in helping you do that. They aren't always.
Really? I hadn't noticed that. Let's see, Josie. Josie was, should or can we call the city to ask what the rental law is? And when we do that, what do we ask for?
Yeah, the city should be able to provide that information, and you can just ask if there's any additional tenant protections at the city level beyond the statewide TPA.
Tess asked, if the tenant refuses to cooperate with showings, can you evict them on those grounds for eviction?
Well, the technical answer is yes. So I believe that most leases are gonna require the tenant to cooperate with showings. Plus, it's encoded in California law that tenants are supposed to cooperate with showings. The problem is that it's the same as filing any other eviction. So if they're not cooperating with your showings, it's not like you can just call up and say, hey, they're not cooperating, I want to kick them out. You've got to document it, file unlawful detainer, post all of the proper notices, and go through an actual unlawful detainer action. So you'd be looking at a few months to try to get them out under those grounds anyway. And I don't know how successful you would be anyway.
Got it. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, let's open this up. Oh, Monica had a good question. Monica Almos, can you refer us a good eviction company?
I was going to bring that up. That's a great question. When it comes to serving these notices, if you've got a property that needs a notice served, I would highly recommend going to one of these eviction companies and having them post everything for you. They'll take the liability, they'll make sure it's all done right, and we can wash our hands of it. There's a number of them online. If you just look for eviction services in California, and when you go to their website, almost all of them have a button you can click on for no fault evictions, and they'll help with that process. I think it costs a couple $100. It's well worth the money to make sure that everything is properly served.
So, but an unlawful detainer going from A to Z costs more than a couple $100, doesn't it? Usually?
Yeah. So if you're actually an unlawful detainer is going to run into a few thousand if you're actually doing it. So the no fault evictions are pretty straightforward. You're basically saying, hey, we're going to sell this property. The owner's putting it up for sale. You got to get out. We have to give you 60 days notice and a month's rent. And that's all pretty straightforward. And they can't really fight a no fault eviction. But at fault eviction, yeah, well, you've got to file an unlawful detainer. And for that, we've got a law firm that we use specifically for that.
So, if we're using a property management company, let's say yours, and and we needed a no fault eviction service because the seller wants to put the property on the market. Is that something you include? Is that an extra charge? Does it really go to unlawful detainer and have a lawyer services handle it? How does that look?
Yeah. If you're a client of ours, so we don't post notices for third parties because obviously, that's an additional level of risk that we're not that we just don't take on. But for our clients that are our management clients of ours, yes, we post all of the notices for no fault and at fault evictions.
So tell me a little bit, because I don't know exactly. I'm sure others are the same way. What are you charging for how, I mean, what do you do and for how much? Because
Yeah,
it
so
kind of sounds to me like maybe somebody doing this on their own is really asking for more liability than it's worth.
yeah, my feeling on the property management side, Neil, is it takes a lot of properties to have a profitable business in property management. You've really got to have some scale. We charge 6.5 to 9.5% of 1 month's rent. So let's say that's 8% kind of down the middle. On a house that's renting for $3,000 a month, we're making $240 a month. If you get that same house as a listing and sell it, how many months do you have to manage it to get the same amount of value out of it as selling it? It's
Well, we're not suggesting, I'm sorry if I made that sound that way.
no.
Okay.
No, maybe I was not explaining that right. I'm just saying it's a lot more work on the management side to make it worthwhile. So if you're only managing 1 or 2 homes, the risk is pretty immense. You've got fair housing, you've got the TPA, you've got all the landlord tenant protections. We haven't even talked about Section 8, all of the new rules around Section 8 and qualifying Section 8 tenants. There's a lot that goes into it. And so,
Well, also, if you're not a broker, you can't legally do this. So that's really kind of where I was going. Don't try this at home, you guys and gals. I mean, unless you're in that business. But really where I was going, I'm sorry, I apologize. I
No
was
worries.
coming from the perspective of a landlord, an owner who isn't using a property management company.
Right.
Okay. So with all the rules and all the regulations, et cetera, and do you recommend raising the rent regularly every year? Is that part of your
Yes,
strategy as a property management company?
absolutely.
Okay. So, I'm one of those guys that didn't do that many years ago, and I ended up not raising the rents for 4 or 5 years because I was happy and comfortable and I didn't have to deal anything with it. And it ended up being very, very expensive for way more expensive than using a property management company. I learned my lesson. But I think we all have clients and individuals like ourselves that aren't using property management company, even though it seems like a lot of money, a couple $100, $250 a month. At the end of the year, or the end of a few years, if you're raising the rents, you would more than cover it in a year or two. That makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it.
And we see it all the time when we see owners that were self-managing that have a disaster happen, and that's why they're finally getting property management, and they paid way more for the disaster than they could have paid for years and years of property management when they end up in one of those situations. So
Yeah, 100%. So let's open it up to questions, unless you have something you specifically want to add here. Troy, it's going to be 1 o'clock, and I don't know if you've got a hard stop, but if you can hang with us for a few minutes, that'd be great.
yeah, I can hang out.
Okay, so direct questions for Troy. I know a lot of you have put them in the chat box here, but I wanted to see what else you've got. Let's go.
I have a quick question. This is Tess.
Go ahead, Tess.
Why is it that a lot of the landlords don't like Section 8?
Well, I'll tell you, we've had our share of problems with it. It is, it is a government administrated program. So we've had owners where there's problems with the housing authority, and we have one example just now. She finally got her payment. It was about 7 months rent that she's been waiting on. So she's been making the mortgage payment. So that's one of the things, is that it's when it's running smoothly, it's good, but when it doesn't, it can still be a problem. I think there was a question in the chat about Section 8, so I'll touch on that really quickly. California has changed the law. They did this in 2020 as well. You used to be able to refuse Section 8 vouchers, and that's no longer the case. So anyone who lists their property for rent in the state of California now is basically agreeing to accept Section 8. So you must take all applications for Section 8, and it is illegal to put anything on a listing about not taking Section 8 vouchers. And then they've just expanded that to make it so that now people with Section 8 don't need to have a credit check in order to qualify. So you have to give them the opportunity to qualify to rent your property by some other means than their credit. So and that applies to everybody. It doesn't matter. If you're listing a property for rent in California, you're subject to that.
Okay, so I had one situation where the landlord has taken a tenant on a Section 8, and then eventually he does not know what happened, but the government has not been sending the money to them, to the landlord. So now they wanted he was hiring an attorney, and then he spoke to the Fed, the federal housing. They said they can't not really do anything. I mean, why is that? I mean, why isn't it that it's automatic that when a landlord has a tenant on the Section 8, it's an automatic deposit to their account, right? So how
It
can
is.
no payment?
It's supposed to be, but they change the amount of that deposit every year. So they reevaluate, and you get a new you get a new housing allotment each year. And it's just, sometimes it seems like something happens in the system where they don't,
That's
the
what they
payment
call the
doesn't.
voucher. They call it
Right.
a voucher. Uh-huh.
Yep.
Okay, that's kind of odd. Thank you.
For sure. Good question. Thanks, Tesk. Any other questions for Troy, please? It's really good information today, Troy. A lot more than I expected, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Very,
I
very
have a
good.
question on this, back on the Section 8. So when you list a lease for rent,
Yep.
what if it's an ADU? Is there any exceptions? You said it doesn't matter, once you list it, you have to open it to Section 8 voucher. That includes a private ADU on your property?
Yes, anything that's for rent in the state of California, you have to treat the Section 8 voucher as income, and there is a formula for how you do that. And you have to allow them to request the use of something other than a credit check to qualify them. Now, they still have to meet all the other criteria. So if you have an income threshold, they still have to meet that. So if their voucher doesn't cover it, they'd have to have additional income to cover that. If you can include rental history, you can verify other things that need to be in your rental criteria. But if this starts to get into fair housing, where you should have, if you're doing this, you should have a written objective rental criteria that you have published, and that should be the rules that you use for everybody that comes in and applies. It really needs to be an objective process and not subjective as to who you're renting to.
Okay,
So-
that's good advice. So, okay, thank you.
So be careful.
So for example, if the criteria states that you need 3 times the rent for income on your application. Would that
Yes.
be an example?
So that's
of
an,
it?
that's an
Explain.
objective. Yeah, that's an objective measure. So let's say that it's a house that rents for, just to use round numbers, $1,000 a month, and you need 3 times. So they need $3,000 a month in income,
Verifiable income.
verifiable income. So if their voucher is for 1,500, then they only have to show $1,500 worth of income. No, that's not true. If their vouchers for 1,500, then that covers the rent, and so they don't have to have 3 times the voucher amount.
Okay. And is there like a criteria we could put with a specific amount of time on that verifiable income? I mean, if they just got a job and they're making, that meets the criteria, but they've only been there for 3 weeks and they have a history of not being able to keep employment. Could you deny that application legally and say you don't fit our criteria? I need to see a 6-month history of steady income.
That's a good question. I don't have the answer for that one.
Okay.
Who would we check with that?
That I would check with, I can check with our attorney. I can ping him on that and see.
Okay.
The landlord tenant attorney we use. My gut would say that in California, if they have a job, that is verifiable income, and you would have to count that as income.
Mhm.
Okay. Maybe you already answered this question, but a problem that I'm hitting in looking for multifamily investment is that after I include the mortgage rate, taxes, insurance, HOA dues, yada yada, my monthly payment will be more than what I can get for rent. And sometimes
That's,
Well, welcome to California.
yep, that's very common. That's especially common with the rates now. It's very hard to get a cash flow property.
I mean, if I could even break even on it, it'd be worth the investment. But
Put
if
more
it's not
money
gonna
down.
cover the expenses,
You have to put more money down, Regina.
okay.
You put more money down, you'll get closer to a cash flow. But if you're going to put 20-25% down in today's world, in most properties, it will be negative cash flow.
Okay.
So you might have to go outside of Los Angeles into San Bernardino, Temecula, Hemet,
Blech.
even to Arizona or Montana. Montana has good cash flow.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, in California, we get appreciation like almost no other state.
Okay.
So that's
Elaborate.
the trade-off. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Is it legal to take large amount deposit when accepting a new tenant with bad credit? They offer it as an incentive. Not sure if we can do this and take this into consideration. Will this be an issue after July 1st when the deposits only can be 1 month?
Yeah, so generally, so it's been capped at 2 months anyway. So we were able to take up to 2 months rent starting July 1st. It'll be 1 month's rent, although a lot of single family homes are exempt from that. as far as you see that a lot, I've got bad credit, but I'll pay 6 months of the rent up front. The you'd want to work with a landlord tenant attorney. You can do that. The problem is once you accept that rent, it causes problems of its own if that turns out to be a problem tenant. So I think you can structure the it can't be an additional deposit. It's prepaid rents. But just be aware, then you've accepted a bunch of future rent. So if you're ever going to take something like that, you'd want a landlord tenant attorney involved.
Right. Okay. Wanted to security deposits. Manny asked something about, oh, you're answering, Manny, except for active military, it's equal to the rent, whether it's under the law or not. Except for active military.
Yeah, so active duty members on July 1st, it's going to be equal to the rent no matter whether it falls under the law or not. It's a carve out for active military. I found that out yesterday at CAR.
Got it. Ryan, I think that's your answer. Okay. Questions on anything else of Troy? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyone
What
else?
about pets?
Don't have any.
Can you
Yeah.
exclude them? I know we can't. but-
I'll give you my quick 2 cents. Do you have time, Neil? I'll give you my 2 cents on pets.
Please.
Right now in California, if it's a pet, you can do an increased deposit. You never want to do a pet deposit. You just want to increase the security deposit. So you can do an increased deposit. It still can't exceed 1 month's rent starting July 1st. But if it's a pet, you can do an increased security deposit and you can do an increased rent. So you can charge a pet rent. If it's an emotional support animal, then you can't do any of that. And it's very easy to get an animal turned into an emotional support animal, and you cannot deny an application from somebody that has an emotional support animal. So my feeling and the way we do it is when you say no pets, then you're guaranteed that you can't get an additional deposit or any additional rent. If you make it pet friendly, then people are more apt to bring their pet in. If you say no pets, they're going to go get an emotional support letter anyway, and you're going to have the pet in there with no economic benefit to yourself. So that's my 2 cents on pets. If they have an emotional support letter, you got to take their pet anyway. So
you might as well not say no pets and get some kind of an increase financially.
right. And
Ryan,
service animal is very different from an ESA. However, ESAs are protected under California law.
Troy, this has been great. Everyone unmute yourselves, please. Unmute yourselves. Let's give a big hand. Woo! All right.
Thank you, thank you.
I had
Thank you,
no
guys.
idea how big this topic was.
Thank you.
Wow. And we could probably go another hour, but we'll set it up for another time. Troy, this has really been great. We appreciate it. Any of the information that we asked that might need some follow-up, if you could get it to me, I'll disseminate it to the management staff and we'll have it for the record. This will be posted probably the first Monday or Tuesday of next week. And we can re-review this. So thank you again, Troy. Great job.
Thanks for having me, Neil. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All right. So anyone, what did you guys learn today from Mr. Troy? Pop up
Everything.
there. Go ahead,
Follow the
what?
law.
Know the law. Know the law. Don't do anything that you don't know about. You know, I hear this from agents all the time. Well, I've never done a lease before, so I think I'll do one. Or I've never sold a laundromat before, so I think I'll do one. we're asking for like taking a gun and shooting ourselves.
Mhm.
Be careful out there. Be careful, be careful, be careful. What else do we learn today? Good stuff. No, nothing? You got it all?
That if you
Increase,
have a,
What?
increase the rent when you can.
Yes.
Increase the rents. That's a big one. I'm embarrassed to tell my story.
You know, on the increase in the rent, when I have clients for the property management and they say, although they've been good forever, you know, they pay on time. And I say, well, they did what the contract says. So let me ask you, Neil, did you buy your tenants Christmas gifts last year?
Yes, I
you
did.
invite-
In it indirectly.
Indirectly, by not increasing the rent, you gave them a $10,000 gift. You need to increase it.
100%.
And you're
100%.
not doing them you're doing them a disservice by not renting, a huge disservice. If you're at 2,000 and you don't raise the rent for 3 years, and now the rent is at 3,000, how are they going to pay the rent and move out of your house? They can't. You are not helping them. You're hurting them.
Yep. Well, let me tell you, when I raised the rent the time I was talking about, I raised it $50,000 a year and I didn't raise it much. It was over a few properties. And then I look back and I had done that for about 10 years. That's $250,000. I could have bought 2 or 3 more houses. What an idiot I am. So don't do that to yourselves, you guys. Please. And if you think you want to, call me. I'll help you. All right, everyone. I can't. Is it anything? Who's the next one up here? I don't have that. Anybody? Who's our 1 o'clock or 1:30?
It's me. 1
A
o'clock.
beer. 1 o'clock. A beer. Take it
Yeah.
away for us.
Okay.
All right. Troy did a great job. Thank you. If you can use him or refer him, it's good business. If you need information, he is, again, another one of the great resources that we have here at Century 21 Masters. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a fabulous day. Be well. Let's go up, open a few more escrows. Manny, thanks for the support, and we'll be in touch. Patty, have a great afternoon. Monica. Ryan, good to see you.
thank you, Neil.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, John Boy. Good night.